In this video, we're going to look at Redux middleware. Now, if you've ever used a library such as Express.js, you're probably already familiar with the concept of middleware. Now, if you haven't, don't worry, it's a really simple concept. Middleware essentially allows you to have a function in between two function calls. So let's imagine we have a function A and that function has been called. We then have a function B. So whenever this happens, A gets called and then B gets called. Well, a middleware would just sit in between those two functions. And whenever function A gets called, the middleware would then get called and then function B would get called. That's all a middleware is. It just sits in between two functions. Obviously that's a really oversimplified view of what a middleware actually is. But that's just a kind of simple concept. So in terms of Redux, a middleware provides a way of doing something in between the point we dispatch an action and then that action reaches the reducer. So it sits in between the action call and that action reaching our reducer. And we can do whatever we want inside these middlewares. For example, there's quite a few third-party middlewares out there that do things such as logging, which is one we're actually going to build. And that will just give you a good example of exactly how a middleware works. So the first thing we need to do when we want to use a middleware is import the apply middleware function from Redux. Now we've got ES6 all sorted out, we can go ahead and make use of the arrow function. So this is generally how you will see middlewares written down in third-party libraries. It might look a bit weird at first, but don't worry, I'm going to explain how it works. So let's go ahead and create our first middleware, and we're just going to create a simple logging middleware. This is going to log out our action and then our next state. Go ahead and define a constant and we'll just call this logger. Now this is where ES6 starts to get slightly weird and middleware just gets a bit confusing if you're not familiar with it. So bear with me and I'll explain exactly what this looks like and exactly what this is in a bit. So the first thing we have is our store. We're going to use an arrow function, and they're going to have next, another arrow function, and then action. So hopefully our store and action are pretty familiar already. So all this is our store and our action. Next is essentially saying, next, what do we want to do next? And we'll see how we use that in a second. So that's essentially just when we want to do something, we call this function and then pass what we want to do to it. Let's just go ahead and console.log dispatching, and then we'll pass in our action so we can see what actions get dispatched. We'll go ahead and create a variable called result, and we'll assign this variable to next, which is our second parameter here, and we'll go ahead and pass in the action there. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to console.log our next state, and we'll simply pass in our store.getState, which should be nice and familiar by now. And then we're simply going to return our result. That is just a simple middleware, and I'll go into a bit more detail about that in a bit. So to use a middleware, it's actually really simple. All we have to do is just pass it to our create store. So we pass the apply middleware function and then we just pass in our middleware, and that should work. Let's go ahead and save that, open up your terminal, check that Webpack has built correctly, and check your browser out, open the console, go ahead and click an action, and you can see here we have dispatching an object of type add and our next state, and that is our next state. And that's actually all there is to a middleware. It's actually really simple. So just to explain what this next is here. So next is obviously a function because we're calling it and we're returning that function as the result. So if you go ahead and comment that line out and comment out the result, you should see that our store never gets updated because we don't actually call that action. We don't actually say next, do this action. So next essentially is just do whatever we want to do. So let's go ahead and check out that. So refresh, and I'll just make this a bit bigger so it's nice and clear. Okay, so we click add, and you can see we get our add action, but our state stays at 0. And you can see that for all of those actions there. And that's because we're not calling next. So to fix that, all we have to do is just call next, and that will call that action, send it to our reducer, and then the reducer will do what it needs to do and return our state. So that's essentially all you need to know about middleware. It's really simple. You won't use it that often, and when you do use it, you'll generally be using third-party middleware, unless you have some specific reason to create your own. But because this syntax here can look quite odd, it's quite an odd and sort of unique thing. You don't often see it. I just want to do this in ES5 for you so you can see exactly what's going on here, because it confused me at first when I first saw it. So I'm just going to comment this out. So the ES5 equivalent of these arrow functions would be another logger, but this time we'd have a function and we pass our store in, and then within this function we would return another function that has the next parameter in it, and then within that we will return another function that has our action inside it. And then inside this final function we would console.log our action. Let's dispatch our action, and let's go ahead and assign our result to next and pass in our action, and then return our result. So this should work exactly the same way as our ES6 version up here. This is just the ES5 version of it, and it is a bit clearer because you can see that our logger is essentially a function that takes our store, that returns another function that takes our next, which returns another function which takes our action. And because of closures in JavaScript, we have access to our store and to next within our final function. So go ahead and save that, go back to your browser, refresh, and we should see that our actions get dispatched. I'm obviously not calling get state here, so you won't see that. But that is how you use the ES6 version in ES5, just to kind of give you that bit more clarity. Now, if you wanted to have more than one middleware, it's really, really easy. And to show you exactly how easy it is, let's just go ahead and create another middleware. So let's create an error middleware, shall we? This is one you might use. So again, we're going to have a store, pass that to our next function, pass that next function to our action function, and then we're going to return console.log new action is our action, and then we'll do a try catch. Let's go ahead and do a try catch. So we'll do next, and we'll pass in, I don't know, a random string. This should throw an error, and we will do a catch that error, and then we'll console.log just error. In fact, that might not throw an error, so let's go ahead and reassign our action to that string and pass in that action. So because our reducer doesn't deal with an action of blah, this should throw an error, and then we should get console.log error. And to use multiple middlewares, you simply just pass in the next middleware like so. Go ahead and save that, refresh your browser, and click add. And you see we get an error. We also get the dispatch from our logger, and we then get the error and our new action. And that's obviously errored because we don't deal with the action of blah. But if we were to remove that and save that, back to the browser, refresh, we should essentially get the same thing happening. Okay, we get two actions dispatched. which is what we'd expect. So that is everything you need to know about Redux middleware. It's nice and simple. As I mentioned before, often you'll just be using third-party middlewares, so it'll just be a case of wiring in the middleware to the apply middleware function. So if you like this video, please don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment, and I'll catch you in the next video.